Welcome to Leaders and Laggards.
Hi there, welcome to Leaders and Laggards. I'm your host tonight, Jeff Custer, and joining me are Dave Swenson and Ken Riches. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for having us.
Tonight, we're going to ponder, to me, an interesting and challenging question for leaders. And it really gets at why does it matter whether a leader determines what's important or not? And just to frame this up, a couple of things I wanted to share as we kind of dig into this. Recently, I was working with a company that I was in a meeting and they shared a dashboard. And they brought this dashboard up on the screen. And guys, the icons were so tiny on the thing because they were measuring so many things. I looked at it and I said, boy, if I was a leader there, I don't know if I'd have any idea what I should really be focusing on. And it was just, it looked overwhelming. And of course, every icon you hit, you drilled into some more detail, and it just got to be what's really important. And it made me think of another thing that happened to me years ago. I used to have a boss, and he had a scorecard, and he had 23 items on his scorecard. And I always used to talk to him about that. And I said, well, what's the most important stuff on this scorecard? And he says, well, it's all important. And I said, we can't focus on 23 things. And we just agreed to disagree because he was adamant that the scorecard not change because everything was important. Nothing could go away. And that's really what I was hoping to dive into tonight in our conversation is when leaders run into things like this, how do they really sift through what's important, and what things have you guys done with your customers, clients, and jobs you've had to help people get better at this stuff? And so I'll throw out for you guys just the first question for the night. I kind of gave you my opinion of why I wanted to talk about this, but why do you think it matters whether a leader determines what's important or not?
I think that this is one of those differentiators between your management position and a leadership position. As a leader, you need to be able to cast vision all the time. So you can't look at the scorecard that you looked at because that begins to look like static. What is it that I'm supposed to be working on? How do I know I'm having a good day? I learned years ago that you need to be able to select 3 to 5 things that are important to you, and you need to be able to work through those. So it's important because if you can't select 3 to 5, you're apt as a leader to jump from thing to thing to thing, which might make your team feel like, hey, this person doesn't really know what they're doing. They don't know what they want to get accomplished, right?
Yeah. Ken, how about your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, it's one of the old adages that you get what you measure. And if you're measuring 23 things like you talked about on that dashboard, then you're getting a mishmash. And it's really hard to differentiate what you're doing. But without having that background as I was preparing for tonight, kind of the focus I took when looking at this is prioritizing what you want to work on as an organization. And I think if you don't have proper prioritization, you're going to create team stress, and it's going to be really hard to improve productivity within your organization. And one of the things I've been going through lately is looking at the new project management PMP exam and the things that they're looking at. And besides having the normal process groups that they have for running a project, and I really look at PMI as an organization that is really focused on leadership because that's what project managers really are leaders. And besides the process groups that they have for initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing, they've also introduced a new concept of domain. And the domains that they're looking at now are people, processes, and business environment. And I think that that is really key, and that a team has to have a common vision and understand where the organization is going. And that really does revolve around people, processes, and the business environment. And I think it's important to focus on that, but also to include the why of the objectives and goals that are going to go along with the organizational strategies and goals moving forward.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Dave, just reflecting back on what you said makes me reminds me of a colleague I had that said in these environments where you're focusing on, focus is even the wrong word, where you're working on too many things.
Right.
It felt like that there's an arcade game I've never played, but I know about it, called Whack-A-Mole.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
And so if you're familiar, if people listening are familiar with this game, there's these little moles that pop up and you have a hammer or something in your hand, and they kind of randomly pop up, and whichever one pops up, that's the one you have to hit. And I think a lot of times organizations can kind of talk about what even what you were talking about, organizations that don't have the proper focus end up playing whack-a-mole. What's the hot thing we got to fix this week, and next week it's a different thing. And I think you picked a good word. I think it puts a lot of stress in an organization, because you're never really quite sure from time to time what you really need to work on, and you end up playing these games. And I think in the end, it's hard to be successful doing that. So a couple of follow-up questions. One I think is a little bit easier than the other, but I'll start off with the easy question. How do you separate the good from the bad?
It was interesting. I was at a meeting today, and one of the things we were talking about is grading your customers, and you want to really keep your A's and B's, and the C's and D's you want to figure out what you want to do with. And I think that really goes along to team tasks as well, and it goes along with what I talked about earlier with prioritization. And if you can categorize your A, B's, C's, and D's, then you can make sure that you have enough time set aside during the week to focus on the things that are really important, your A's and B's. And I look at those, your A's and B's, as things that are going to help drive organizational improvement, and they align with your strategic goals and objectives. Your C's are, and I think in one of our previous episodes, we talked about, the daily grind and the whirlwind that goes on. And those are kind of your C's, the things that are really necessary to keep the organization working, but they don't necessarily add a lot of value from a personal perspective, whether you're a team member or a leader. And then you have the D's, the things that are things that you should either delete or delegate, especially as a leader going through. And so I really think that making sure that you can go through and prioritize what the organization is working on and pick the right time during the week to work on those A's and B's. The C's, you're gonna have to spend time every day working on those, and then the D's, hopefully you can find a way to delegate or delete them.
Yeah, exactly. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I guess similar but a little different approach. When I was coming up through the ranks, I learned this theory called a pick chart, right? And so always with my team, I would have the 4-quadrant chart, and we'd meet around that chart once a day and talk about, what happened yesterday, what's going to happen today, what does everybody need to know, and what do you need help with. But kind of all around the pick placement being, what are potential things we could be working on? What are the initiatives or important things we could be working on? What are our challenges we might be working on? And what are the things we need to kill? That's our stop doing list, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so every day I needed to, I felt like it was important to be communicating to the team, guys, this is what we need to be getting done. Nowadays, I guess it would be archaic maybe to have a whiteboard outside the office where everybody met, but
yeah, you got to have it'd have to be electronic, of course. Yeah.
would have to be electronic, right? But back in the day, we used a whiteboard with some post-it notes, and it worked pretty well. So that's still the theme that I like to use with clients, is to say, how do we know what we're trying to get accomplished today? How do we know if we're having a good day? And by the way, of all the things that we could possibly be working on, what are the things that we need to be working on, and what are the things that we can kill?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the challenges, listening to you guys talk about those type of things, I see organizations that I think have maybe what I'd call legacy activities.
Right.
They're activities that we've just done them forever, and um, i- and they're so entrenched. People are reluctant or maybe even afraid to say, let's squash this, let's stop doing it. And so yet you see organizations continuing those activities. And I always, what always makes me think of like going to a circus, and you got somebody in the ring with a hula hoop, and they've got a trained dog that jumps good jumping through hoops. And at the end of the act, it was cute and all, but it didn't really accomplish anything other
Right.
than you're good at jumping through hoops. And I know I've said that to people I've worked with over the years. I feel like that little dog sometimes when you get into some of these activities that we're talking about that are at that D level or at that lower end. Um, and the courage it takes to say, let's stop doing that.
Right.
I had somebody I work with one time. This was very telling. Is uh, one of these legacy activities that was a hoop jumping exercise.
Mm-hmm.
We put together the answer to the question, and this person said to me, "Well, I'm just going to save this for next year." When we get asked the same question again, I'm just going to bring this out, dust it off, and resubmit it just as it is. That's the stuff I think we're all talking about, to say, how do we figure out how to stop that? How do we get rid of those bad things? So
Right.
that's good. And so then it leads me into a question that maybe gets to be a little more difficult, is how do you separate the good from the better? So, I go back to my old boss who had all those items on his scorecard, and you look down there, and in a way he was right. They were all important things. We really couldn't fail at any of them. And yet it didn't serve our purpose. So that's kind of where I come up with this question is, it's easier to me to say, well, that's bad, let's get rid of that. How do you separate the good from the better?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, going back to the pick chart example, it's all about what's the effort versus the impact, right? So, what are my quick wins that I can be doing today? And yeah, what are those things that are maybe more project based, but what needs to be done today?
Yeah.
And that all comes down to, what is the impact going to be, and what's the effort going to be required to get there?
Yep. Same process.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same process. Yeah.
What do you do, Dave, when it gets to where you look at two activities, and even through a lot of digging, they appear like at the end they're equal on your scale that you just talked about? How do
Well,
you
I
pick?
mean,
How do you pick?
so you do your best. I mean, you make an educated guess, but my goal would always be to have had that conversation before we started, right? So we would have
Yeah.
already ranked these things, right? This would
Sure.
be an 8, this would be a 6, right? And you're going to get some of those things wrong, but I think the more involved the team is in agreeing, yeah, this is what the impact would be, this is how much work it would take to get done. But that's part of the goal of being, part of the game of being a leader, is sometimes you have to make that executive decision and say,
Yeah.
yes, this is more important than this. But if you're in the role that your past leader, supervisor, manager was in, where we're trying to get 26 things done, and you're going to juggle 26 hoops at one time, you can't do it, right? So
Yeah.
what are those 3 to 5 things that you can get done? Where
Yeah.
can you make an impact?
Yeah. How about your thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from looking at it from the dashboard perspective, you still need to measure that stuff, but does it really have to be weekly? Can it be monthly or quarterly? And you only put the items up on the scorecard that you're going to talk about on a weekly basis that are really critical. And so that you don't forget about the other things, but that's what your one-on-ones with your direct reports are for, and holding your people accountable. But from a bigger perspective, going back to the example where I talked about with the grading, the A, B, C, D, your A's and B's, if you're an effective leader, hopefully there's a good mix of organizational improvements and personal improvements that go into that. And I would say that you have to focus on, the kind of the ticket to the dance is you got to focus on the organizational improvement items first. And then you work on the personal improvement items second. They're both really important, but you've got to make sure that the organization is progressing. And then to be more effective in the long term, you want to bring the skill level and the effectiveness of your whole team up through the personal improvement. So that's where I would make the differentiation between the good and the better is organization first, and a very close second that has to have a certain percentage on a weekly or monthly basis is the personal development, so that the team is continuing to grow.
Yeah. Dave, I think my notes I wrote down, I think probably tie into your scale that you mentioned. And
Right.
I was really thinking about it maybe broader, but really looking, if you're trying to separate the good from the better, is how do you determine that what's adding the most value to the organization? So is it adding value to shareholders, to employees, to customers? Kind of that, you guys know that, the cliched three-legged stool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what your scale is kind of talking about is, okay, how are we evaluating these different components? And that should help drive what rises, the cream that gets to the top of the list.
That's right. I mean, if you set up a consistent way to evaluate, well, then if you miss it, then at least you've got a consistent measurement system in place. So now you need to figure out how to get, to rearrange things coming into the hopper. But
Yeah.
it needs to be a standard way. You can't waver, because otherwise the team loses faith that you actually can lead them and you know where you're trying to go.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So moving on, the next question I want to dig into a little bit is, you guys did a great job talking about how can you do this? How do we try to make good decisions? What happens? What have you seen when leaders don't do this well? How does it affect employees, impact the culture, impact the business? What happens when leaders don't do this well?
And I think that goes back to, I remember one of the sessions that we had that you really focused on, Jeff, was the toxic leadership. And I think that bad leadership in business can lead to toxic working attitudes, loss of staff, loss of your high performing employees, or disengagement of them. You can really hurt your culture and your productivity and ultimately the bottom line.
I mean, I think this is a mission critical point for a leader. If you cannot effectively cast vision with your team, you can't be the leader of that team. And so, yeah, you're going to miss it once in a while, but you need to be able to confidently cast vision. And that doesn't mean once a month or once a year. That means every day. This is what we're trying to get done, and this is why it's in alignment with our vision and values. And you need to be able to speak that to your team, because otherwise you'll lose them.
Yeah, I think I've used this analogy with you guys before, but I always pops into my mind when we talk vision is Lewis and Clark standing on a bluff. And I know I've used this with you guys before, but I still think it just fits. Is the effective leader says, we're going there, and they can point to something, and as they go, they course correct and all that stuff. But if a leader's not doing this, to me, you're standing on that bluff and say, we're going somewhere.
Right.
And we're going somewhere. I'm not quite sure exactly where, but it's somewhere. And you're right, Dave.
360-degree panoramic lens. And
yes.
We're going.
Yeah, we're going. We're going somewhere.
Right.
And you just lose doing that. I think you used the word earlier, stress. I think it's stressful on a team. It gets confusing to a team. It's just a bad all around thing to employees, to the culture and the business. So I think we kind of went through this already a little bit, but what steps, techniques in addition to what you guys have already said, have you used to help leaders where you've seen them off the rails?
Usually for me, what I've seen is when leaders get off the rails, it's because they don't have a strategy, right? So the things, the tools, the tactics that I teach them are, well, let's talk about strategy deployment, Hoshin planning. And if that's too elaborate for you, then we can go the EOS route, the entrepreneurs. Those are good ways to set your strategy. But then from that point, I go back to the basics. I'm an advocate of the 1 minute manager philosophy, where every day I'm taking that time to set the goal with the team and praise people, with catch them doing things right, and make sure that when I do have to call them out and give some corrective feedback, well then I make sure that discussion ends with getting them back on track and letting them know how and why I appreciate them. But bigger picture, the leader needs a strategy too. So we need to, and we can't, that doesn't change from day to day, right? What are we trying to get accomplished this year, this month, this quarter, and how is what I'm doing right now fitting into that? So, a little side story here. I worked with a client a handful of weeks ago, and we looked out of their office window, and I hate those where you're on a second level looking down at production, but that was the scenario. And we could see 12 production lines. And I asked him, how does anybody out there know what they're trying to get accomplished today? And nobody could answer my question.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to look down on you to see that you're doing some work, knowing that none of you know what a good day looks like. And I don't know what a good day looks like for you either. How do you manage? How do you lead in that environment?
Oh, wow.
So, that's when you go back to the drawing board and say, okay, time out. What is our strategy? How are we going to get things done? What is my, even the concept of leader standard work? What do I need to be doing every day to make sure that the whole team's executing, right? So,
yeah. Ken, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's the tools and techniques that I've used in the past. I think the important thing is number one is the inward focus, and making sure that the leader understands emotional intelligence, so that they can go through and really be able to work with their team and understand their team, understand how they're coming across, and what their team's motivations are, and to demonstrate that they care. And then to work with the rest of the organization, the second aspect that I've used is the outward mindset, and it's like to work with the other departments and the other groups within the organization, and what can our team do today to help you be successful today, and just to have that outward mindset. And those are really the two methods that I use to help improve leaders.
Yeah, and so that I think some great ideas that you guys bring to leaders, organizations that might be struggling in this area. And how I'd like to wrap up, I'd just like to have each one of us give a word of encouragement to leaders in this area, just kind of based off of your experiences. So, how would you like to encourage leaders tonight?
Yeah, I think I look at it as a leader, you need to internalize the philosophy of coaching and mentoring, and it goes along to what Dave had mentioned, is that it starts by showing your team that you care, providing positive feedback for the things that they're doing well, and constructive criticism on what they can do to improve. And then it's coaching for accountability and mentoring for personal improvement.
That's wonderful. Dave, how about you?
I guess I'll start with an adage, and it's old, but it's simply that without a plan, your goal is really nothing more than a dream, right? So, but the flip side to that is, if you're going to be that leader, if you're going to lead the team towards that goal, then one of the things I think you can do is think about, what am I doing every day to make this happen? I probably mentioned this before, but one of the things that I recommend to leaders is start taking time each day to keep a personal plus delta. What did I want to get done today, and what didn't go so well, and what can I try tomorrow? And by the way, what do I expect to happen?
Yeah. So I'm going to add on to that, because that's kind of saying what I was thinking is, so many of these things that we talk about, sometimes I think leaders are afraid to take action because they think failure's the end. And I think back, Dave, on when you're talking about your ranking system to try to figure out what's important, and you say, well, sometimes you'll get it wrong. And you have to say, that's okay if I get it wrong once in a while, as long as when I do get it wrong, we go back and do some analysis on, okay, why did we get it wrong? And can we do it better next time? And I think so many leadership principles like this can be practiced.
Right.
And so my encouragement to leaders is, don't be afraid if something fails or a mistake happens, because likely it's not fatal. Learn from it, and then the next time you'll be even better. Well, thank you guys very much for your insight. I always learn from you guys every week when we get together and have these discussions, and really appreciate your expertise. And listeners, thanks for joining in this episode of Leaders and Laggards, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching, and remember, leadership matters.